The South African Union of Students, SAUS, has embarked on a national shutdown of all universities after talks with the Department of Higher Education and Training seemingly failed. This is according to the union. The shutdown follows a purported breakdown in talks between the Department of Higher Education, SAUS, Student Representative Council, Presidents and Secretary Generals of the South African Public Universities. From our studios now in Pretoria, we're joined by Thabo Shingange. He is SAUS spokesperson. Good afternoon to you, Thabo. Thank you so much for coming through. So firstly, talk to us about these issues that you were hoping that the minister would be able to attend to.
Thank you very much for having me. I think the issues speak fundamentally to the registration process. I mean, as things stand, we have students who cannot register due to large amounts of historical debt that has accumulated over the years. As things stand, we have postgraduate students who cannot continue with their studies because they do not have postgraduate funding, and some of these studies require specialization. For instance, if someone is studying psychology, you'd know that for psychology you'd require an honors and a master's degree in order for you to practice, but those students are found wanting because they cannot continue with these particular specializations on the basis that they do not have postgraduate funding, which is an irony because for the last 3 years you've been funding them on NSFAS, which proves, or you have proven rather, that these students do not have money and are coming from poor and working class backgrounds, and suddenly in their honors and their masters year you are saying that they have to pay for it for themselves. Where is this money suddenly coming from? We have an issue particularly of UNISA in particular, whereby the argument here is that in the past UNISA students have always been thought out to be coming from a working background, whether it was teachers, whether it was the police force, or whatever the case might be, and so it was long distance learning. However, over the years the conditions of UNISA have changed. Currently over 80%, I'm not necessarily be sure of the exact figure, but close to the entire University of UNISA is operating like a traditional university with students who are no different to a student you'll find in your nearby traditional university. And we're saying that they need to be treated equally like any other student, receive their allowances like any other student. You're holding on to the academic records of historical debt. Many students can't get meaningful employment because universities are holding on to their academic records. These are but many of the demands, of the 15 demands we have put forward.
All right, so we understand that these issues were raised between yourselves and the Minister of Higher Education during a meeting that was held sometime in November last year.
Sure.
And what was the minister's response?
The meeting last year, and I think the department is having a very dishonest conversation when it comes out and makes very funny comments, like the minister this morning saying that these issues are manufactured. It's a complete lie, and they must be cautioned in terms of these utterances. In November last year, we had a meeting of SRC presidents, SAUS, and the Minister of Higher Education, in which the guidelines were presented, and we had an engagement around the guidelines. Of those guidelines, SRCs rejected the point, especially that speaks to the issue of accreditation. SRCs rejected those guidelines. We were told that a follow-up meeting would happen in December with the minister and SRCs. We were surprised to see in December the guidelines circulating with the minister's signature as finalized, whereas in November you would have rejected the very same guidelines. How do you circulate guidelines that say that you're not going to fund students who are not in unaccredited accommodation? These students have been staying in those buildings for the last 2 years. You are coming now in their final year of study. You are telling them in November that as of January you will not be funding them. Where must these students go? At the University of Venda, as we speak, you find students that were sleeping on the side of the road merely because these guidelines have affected them. And so we've rejected the guidelines last year. You're bringing them to us as a finalized document. You're going to say you engaged SRCs and you engaged SAUS, but you're not going to quote the fact that they rejected you from last year November in terms of the guidelines. And here we are saying that these issues are manufactured, whereas you have turned a blatant disregard, a blind eye, demonstrating disregard to what students have been saying from last year November still. The meeting happened in Cape Kempton Park, if I'm not mistaken.
What specifically is still outstanding from all your concerns? Because the minister was on one of SABC radio stations, Ukhozi FM today, saying that a decision was taken to allow returning students who are funded by NSFAS to register at institutions despite owing fees. So what was the agreement? And as I said, what is outstanding from the concerns that you raised to the minister?
You see, we are going to run into a trouble when we center this conversation merely around the NSFAS recipients in the higher education space. Why am I saying we're going to run into a conversation? As a union, we already are aware of the challenges that a student experiences when they're trying to apply for an SAUS. Let's say, for instance, you're missing middle students, many of which are the ones who are currently struggling with the large amount of historic debt. You have focused the conversation on SAUS students. You have students who, for instance, maybe their parents are earning 360,000 rand with 2 students in the university space. They cannot afford to be funding these 2 particular students. They are sitting here with historic debts of 100,000, 200,000. The universities are saying to them, in order for you to register, pay half of that historic debt. Half of that historic debt is close to 100,000 rand. Where are these students supposed to get this particular money from? Last year, the Minister, Naledi Pandor, made a commitment of about 1 billion rand towards assisting students who are dealing with historical debt. We are saying that Minister Blade ought to show a commitment that they are trying to resolve the issue of the missing middle. They are trying to resolve the issue of historical debt, which is blocking students from registering. University South Africa, USAF, earlier today released communique supporting that the issue of historical debt cannot be left to the universities. The department needs to take full responsibility and show sound leadership in terms of demonstrating how we can bring normality to the registration period. We also need to lobby in the National Treasury and also need to lobby the South African Reserve Bank, because we are fully cognizant of the fact that the department alone will not be able to deal with 9 billion rand of historical debt. But the department ought to be bringing people to the table. Where there are deficiencies in the department, they must bring the relevant stakeholders and not dismiss student issues as if they are immaterial. Currently, there are students who cannot register, sitting with historical debt. What must happen to those particular students?
Very quickly now, Thabo, just in conclusion. So are you willing to further engage with the minister as to avoid the protests that we saw back in 2005? Are you willing to engage him further?
Look, as SAUS, we want to categorically state our predisposition is not protest. We have been engaging in good faith, and we want the minister to meet students and engage honestly and in good faith. He must respond with practical solutions that will bring normality to the lived realities on students immediately and currently. Those issues whereby ought to have a difference, we can engage if the minister is willing to engage honestly and openly. We also need to warn universities, especially Northwest University, which has evicted students, that what they're doing is illegal, and Fort Hare University. We want to say that the minute you begin to engage in bad faith, you are going to create problems on your campuses. You are going to create situations where you cannot be able to control them. And also to the department, we must remind the nation that it was under the current Minister Blade where we saw mass brutalization of students in 2015. And we are beginning to see the signs again of universities relying on the minister's utterances to justify the abrasive use of force against students who are merely fighting for a right to education. We need to guard and caution against such abrasive use of force. Ours is not to vandalize, and we are saying to students, maximize restraint. You have a right to protest, you have a right to demonstrate, and we'll demonstrate up until the minister takes our demands seriously and responds positively to these particular demands.
All right, time constraints, we'll leave it at that. Thabo Shingange is the spokesperson for the South African Union of Students, SAUS, joining us live from our studios in Pretoria. Staying now with us.